everyone, and welcome to the virtual Agile Meetup. It's really lovely to have everybody here today, whether it's your morning, your noon, or your night. It's great to see new faces and some returning faces on the list, and I'm sure they will come very soon. So yes, thank you for joining us. I always do that a little bit soon. I forget that even though we've done this like at least 30 times now, I have a slide to say thank you. But here we go, just in case you didn't hear it, you can see it on the page. A little bit about Ines and I'm an Agile coach. I work a lot with teams and supporting them through their Agile journey. And Ines does a lot of similar things. Don't you, Ines? Do you want to say anything about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So back in the days, we sort of joined together because we got a lot of questions of people saying, what, doing Agile work in a virtual manner? And yes, it can be done. Actually, that's how I used to work with satellite teams for years anyway. And yeah, I'm an Agile coach and a climate coach. And I think that's quite a tune for the session that we have prepared today.
Yes, thank you, Ines. Okay, so a quick whiz through of how to ask questions, what to ask questions, all those sorts of things. So as it says here, we do record the session. The time box for this session is an hour, so we've got about 56 minutes left. In regards to questions that you have, feel free to put it in the chat. We love a bit of chat. Or you can come off mute and just ask your question. Do whatever you feel most comfortable with. We are very hands-off in terms of facilitating, and Heather is very comfortable with just answering questions as we go along. So that's good news. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of a warm-up in the next 30 seconds. And if you've been here before, you will know that I love a bit of rock, paper, scissors. Now, I use this almost every day with my teams. It's a great tool for decision making, for just, having conversations, agreements, all of that sort of stuff. So today we're going to use it slightly differently. So can I see your best rocks? I'll give you a clue. Yeah, cool. Best rocks, brilliant, beautiful. Papers.
Oh.
It makes me laugh every time, and it's never get bored of that. Thank you, lovely papers. And what about scissors? Depending on what kind of day you've had, I suppose. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Brilliant. Right now, our hands are nice and warmed up. I'm going to ask 3 questions, and hopefully those questions are answerable with a rock, a paper, or a pair of scissors. So the first question is this. Continuous learning is what school's about. This is a match made in heaven. Agile education and sustainability. You feel free to disagree. I mean, you don't have to agree. You can put your scissors. It's totally fine. Cool. Okay, so we've got some rocks out there. Oh, what tie?
I didn't connect rock, paper, and scissors to the greatest. I just need to read. That's all. I'm reading now.
No, that's right. I could have explained it better. Yeah, I'm having a weird day today. Okay, cool. Education these days needs a shake-up, and Agile and its mindset is what it needs. Cool, great. Loads of rocks out there. Awesome. And the third question is, I'm excited to be here. Come on, Helen, let's just get going. If I had more hands, I'd just crack on with it. Okay, cool, brilliant. Well, that's pretty much it. So Ines, I'm going to hand over to you for this bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And so thank you for keeping us smiling as we're warming up. And yeah, I think over the last few years, this is a conversation that I have more and more often in terms of education. Our education system is really, I think, is to evolve in line with not just the current demands, but what's going to become important. Even if we think about how we access, distribute, consume information, this has drastically changed since, how when I went to school, or even the Cambridge curriculum here in the UK, right? Since that has been put in place, it changed for quite a bit. Anyway, don't let me divert, Helen. Let me introduce who we have with us today. This is all to say that I'm very happy for Heather to spend this time with us today, because we're going to cover some of these, the relation of Agile, virtual settings, also sustainability. She has over 2 decades of experience in science teaching, in a decade in Agile, and we met through the Agile Alliance, the sustainability initiative. I'll put a link in the chat in a minute. And for whoever is interested in this intersection of Agile and sustainability, let me know, because I have quite a few things to share on the matter. So don't let me divert too much. Without further ado, Heather, please, thank you for spending this time with us. Take it away. Tell us more about yourself.
All right. Hi, welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So Ines and I started talking about education and Agile and sustainability because sustainability is probably one of the greatest problems that we want to be preparing our students to be able to engage and address and come up with solutions for. And also here in the United States, at least, our next generation science standards, which are the current federal national standards that our states are now rewriting their science standards to align with, has climate change and human impact on the environmental systems as one of the standards for students to study from kindergarten through 12th grade. So every subject area now includes some level of talking about human impact on the earth, and in particular, climate change, where it's appropriate in terms of the science studies that they're doing, but certainly K through 8, because they do sort of an integrated blended science. They have it every year. And one of the things that we had started talking about was how does Agile, or how can Agile practices in education help support some of the shifts that we need to see, including those sort of soft, quote unquote, skills that are actually the hardest skills to learn, but are difficult in today's educational system to really practice because of our model of education, especially in the younger grades, tends to be much more teacher-led and student listen, right? And when we talk about those skills that businesses, that successful research teams need, they include so many of the skills that we actually clearly define and provide guidance on how to make them work in Agile Scrum framework, like making sure that you're touching base every day and ask questions like, where are you having problems, right? That normalizes challenge in a way that we tend to not normalize challenge in many classroom conversations, where kids are more about, I need the A, like just tell me how to get the A. It's also learning to sort of work within a team. There's a lot of research on how teams work. We don't talk about this with kids in the younger grades. When I started introducing actual conversations around how do we set up successful educational teams so that you can collaborate and communicate well together, my students across the board had never had a single teacher ever have that conversation with them before. And that's an important conversation to have. I mean, when Google spends $3 million researching on what makes effective teams, and we're not making use of that knowledge with students who need those skills, then we're missing out on an opportunity to do two things. One is make those teams work better, but also give them the opportunity to practice and figure out how they are going to best engage in working team collaboration, which is something that we know foundationally and fundamentally is going to have to be a part of figuring out any solutions to improve sustainability. So there's an article that I've written that we're working on that's getting ready to be published, and some of the other things that we mention are how do we build foundational for critical thinking and developing curiosity? And then how do we grab these sustainability challenges as a part of designing, say, project and problem-based learning? Because then we can actually really start applying those standards of looking at how are humans impacting Earth, how are we, what can we do to build greater sustainability, and getting kids engaged in really being aware of and talking about and coming up with some solutions themselves. So that's kind of where we're at. To give a little bit more background to where I came from that brought me to this place. I'm a universal design for learning curriculum developer. So what that means is that I believe in removing barriers to learning, and you remove barriers to learning by offering opportunities to either engage with curriculum in different ways. So, for example, rather than only having a reading assignment, you might also have the option of watching a video or listening to an audio version of the book that you're working from. And also that when you're coming up with solutions to problems, when you're asking kids to show how they understand, you're looking much more not just to say, show me the answer, but like apply it. How can we apply it? And then giving options and choice in how they do that, like making a video or a podcast or writing about it, so that we're giving kids more opportunities to engage with learning materials in different ways rather than a simple, straightforward sort of traditional model of education where the teacher speaks, the kids take notes, and then they kind of regurgitate back what they've learned. So that it allows for kind of a greater depth of engagement. And that engagement is really the heart and soul of what we need to do in order to come up with better solutions, because our expectations and our assumptions around how to do things don't necessarily match. And, for kids to be able to converse and participate in those decision-making, they come with a different perspective that can be really helpful. And maybe, where we can talk a lot about the shifts in kids and how they're perceiving problems and how they perceive what's right or wrong, and how that shifted, and then how that also then changes what they're willing to say is an acceptable solution or a possible way of addressing some of the problems. So, questions, comments?
Thank you. And thank you for giving us all this context. I love that today we're just going to have a fire chat sort of session.
Yes.
So, and especially what you were saying just now, it really resonates with me, right? So if we want a better future, we first need to be able to imagine the better future so that we can create the better future. Just going through the motions without emotions, like zombie Scrum and all these things that we are so used to talking about, is not going to get us somewhere different. So one of the questions that we had for you was about if you could please discuss about challenges and barriers when you're trying to bring to conversation sustainability, and especially in education, right? This could be already quite under stress and pressure, complex system in itself. How can you bring it into conversation? What sort of challenges you find?
So one of the things that I was thinking about was I'm working with a couple of organizations and foundations now, and what we're actually looking at is, rather than trying to bring everything into classrooms as one more thing or one more shift for teachers, but also to make use of that sort of after school club kind of organization. And certainly I know that there are environmental clubs that have come up with some really great sustainability solutions in their schools. So for example, the high school that my daughters attended, their environmental club was the one that actually really moved through. They called it Shutdown Friday. And the idea was that everything got actually turned off on Fridays for the weekend. So the photocopy machines didn't just get left on, they actually got switched off to save power. You know, that there was then another initiative that they started was around recycling and figuring out how to do recycling in the cafeteria. So yes, Helen, you're muted. Just so
so, yeah, sorry, I was just clapping. I just really love that idea.
Yeah.
So simple.
Yeah. So I mean,
yeah.
so it's that we can talk about these things in classrooms, but that we can also hand over a lot more leadership and opportunities for kids to try things out and learn that process by moving it into club after school activities. So then there's less pressure on teachers in terms of how do I rewrite my curriculum to make it more engaging, or, you know, to have time for sort of this kind of problem-based challenge of, say, like, how are we going to lower electrical use in our building, and taking that out of the classroom and then putting it in to an organization where you've got kids who are truly engaged and passionate about that particular topic. So you're not also dragging kids along who are like, yeah, I really don't care, right? Like, let's feed those kids there. So I think that that's one way that schools can make use of this. And certainly there's plenty of research through Agile Alliance, that through their Agile Alliance education, they've got examples of after school type of activities where they've been able to successfully incorporate Agile practices like Scrum framework to manage clubs, right? So that's one way of doing it. I think, you know, the other is obviously if we can come up with some more engaging ways of putting that into classroom context, where at least the topics are being brought up and discussed, and the science or the sort of foundational understanding that you need to be able to build on in order to come up with solutions can be introduced in a way that engages, because it's showing how it actually can be used and applied. And that's really the heart of project or problem-based learning, is to be able to bring the world into the classroom in a way that allows kids to say, there's purpose for me understanding this, there's purpose for me to learn this topic. And certainly that's also a really easy place to plug in some Scrum framework practices, because those tend to be small group activities, and they're not going to, and they're sort of, they run alongside of a lot of regular curriculum that's going on. And so it can be a comfortable way of teachers and students sort of transitioning and learning some of these practices. And certainly that's how I started, right? Like, I started with doing a project using Scrum, and then I rolled it out for my entire classroom management process.
Start small and learn fast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rings a bell. Right. So
Great.
If we have any questions, just feel free to unmute and jump on. So don't let me just hoard all the mic and bombard you with questions. So we have some people from education as well, so feel free just to unmute. Go ahead. Otherwise, pop it in the chat and we'll read it for you.
Definitely. I mean, I think I've presented at a number of conferences on how to engage and use Scrum in classrooms and why the benefits of it. Certainly benefits I saw with my students were they were much more engaged and interested in the content. They felt, and I did not teach like high level learners. I taught like really just regular kids, and they became much more interested in the subject area because they felt like they had so much more voice and control choice in what was going on in the classroom. Because I blended the universal design for learning. So I was giving them sort of more voice and choice and saying, you know, do you want to read the textbook? Do you want to watch a video? All right, like, when do we think we need to have some lecture because we have some things that need clarification, versus just checking in at the tables. But also because they were able to then say, you know, like, I need to do something hands-on. So I need to start with something that's much more interactive for me. And then I can start reading about understanding what I was observing, right? And so in that sense, I think Scrum really enriches a classroom experience for everyone.
We spoke in the past before. My nephew, yes, that is in Barcelona, is going through a learning sort of curriculum quite different. And I don't know the specifics if that's also aligned with the universal thingy design or how, but one of the things that when he explains how they organize themselves, they sort of choose subjects and then they need to work out how they're going to learn this subject. They do it in a team, and sort of it becomes very apparent to me that sometimes we sort of, or at least how I learned in school, it was you learn things by yourself. You do sometimes things with groups, but really everybody divides and you do your bit, and then you land in the workspace and it's very different, right? In the way that you innovate, in the way that you tap into each other potential, you do it as a group. So it's a very different setting. So preparing people in advance, I think, is the way to go. But obviously,
yes, and along with that is we actually have substantial research showing that peer-to-peer learning, which is learning with your classmate, actually deepens understanding and extends knowledge much more rapidly. So when we talk about trying to sort of pick up and fill in the gaps and address the losses of the pandemic and remote learning, putting kids into those peer-to-peer environments actually can help us do that more easily. I'm just reading a note here into the lead. So is LEAD specific to Florida or is it in general, Missy?
LEAD is done by the U.S. Green Building Council, and they have a huge program for sustainability, engaging schools and school districts in sustainable practices. And they actually engage teachers in order to bring that into the classroom in curriculum. They have after-school programs. I've worked with many, but when you're discussing this, one of the things that fascinated me when I started learning Agile was, in my opinion, LEAD is leadership in energy and environmental design, and it usually applies to the building, but there's also operations and maintenance of the facilities. But then you engage the teachers as well. So we've actually, surprisingly, in Florida, we've actually had some very robust programs in South Florida. I know well, you're not even allowed to speak it in our actual government in Florida.
No, I know.
We're not allowed
I
to
have
talk
friends who
about
teach in Florida.
But when I was learning about the Agile process, one of the things that fascinated me and really sucked me into it the most is having my background is full sustainability. It's what I've been doing for 25 years. And when I learned about Agile and what this company is doing that I agreed to work with, is they are looking at the process and how that works. And it's very similar to LEAD. It's when you're constructing a project, it's like constructing a building. Believe it or not, it's very similar in the way. And what we started doing is LEAD brought everybody to the table from the beginning. So for example, like in the Agile process, you would bring the SME, the BA, but then you'd have the testers, you'd have the developers where they'd be at the table right from the beginning. Well, it's kind of the same way that when you apply that to education, where you really want to get the collaborative and the communication, which is one of the biggest problems in Agile, is that, and that with, it's the same thing with learning. It's that we have the same problems. They're just different industries in the way they present themselves. So I was curious, when you're talking about embedding this into curriculum with Agile, that highly interests me because, as long as, you're touching parts and pieces, there's always good ways to integrate other opportunities, because some kids are interested in some things, but some are very IT oriented, some are more hands-on, kinesthetic, like to build, but there's crossover between all these things. So I was wondering how it seems like you are very familiar with looking at the bigger picture and the holistic approach.
Well, yeah, I mean, I came to education from public health, and I always say that kind of changes it shifts what your objectives become, right? Like, so in public health, our goal is to motivate changes in behavior so that you're making healthier choices. When we come to education, we talk a lot about engagement, but we tend to forget that motivation is really the goal of engagement. Like, let me engage you, say, this is interesting, and then hopefully then trigger motivation to want to learn more deeply and apply it, right? And so I think that that's, thank you for joining us, Tress. I think that that's a big of what I was able to do by creating this sort of blended classroom, in particular, introducing the Agile Scrum framework, right? So Scrum is a project-based, a project management practice.
Right.
The framework, right? So if you just shift and think, well, all learning is a project, then it becomes a little bit easier to understand how this can all fit together. And
Right.
it's really how we present the learning that then becomes the biggest shift from current old 1700s style education, which still predominates, into this sort of, more flexible, more collaborative sort of a classroom structure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that, there are a lot of teachers who would be much more interested and want to do these innovations. But one of the other gaps that we have is actually educating parents and making sure that parents also understand that they're still learning what they're supposed to learn. They're still going to pass whatever exams they need to pass, even though their classroom doesn't look like the classroom you grew up in. But we have such an embedded idea of what education looks like, to the point where, somebody I know used the description: a 3-year-old who has never been in a formal classroom plays school by lining up their animals and lecturing, right? And so we're really sort of, it's a big lift to shift that educational sort of industry thinking and expectation. But the biggest pushback I got was originally from parents who were not familiar with Scrum. And then the biggest support I got were parents familiar with Scrum.
Why doesn't that surprise me?
Yeah. And the parents who knew, like, as soon as these parents who didn't know what Scrum was, when those parents came into an open house scenario and started going, this is so great, we're so excited, they completely shifted their minds. So it was more about their needing to understand that the learning's still happening. And if anything, the learning is deepening because the kids are more engaged in the material, because it's more independent and it's much less passive. It's much more active learning.
It's really interesting, isn't it? With sort of, this I think of it as a product. So the children are almost like our product, and an agile mindset is great for these complex environments, and human beings are the most complex, I think, of all things, aren't they? So it seems like just the perfect fit, to be able to say, we've got these people, these products that we want to develop into, things that give us value, because they are our future, right? So what's the best way to do it? Well, potentially there's this amazing framework, Scrum, or whatever one you want to use, that might be able to help us with it. And it's really rolling out, isn't it? Because I was talking to a chap the other day about Scrum in education, and an organisation about it as well. And obviously we had you coming on, Heather, and I think it's in the Netherlands as well, I think, where they're doing Edu Scrum.
So you were talking to Willie. You were talking to Willie.
I wasn't talking to him, actually, but it was
Edu Scrum. Yes. And I've had conversations with him, and he taught chemistry, right? So this is a hard science, very skill-based, and he is not a universal design for learning instructor. He basically just gave the kids the framework and built from there. So, and had good outcomes. Yeah, I mean, I think the other piece of it is there's a level of respect that's built into the Scrum framework on all sides, right? Like the philosophy is the team knows what they need to do. We should trust them to be able to do what they need to do and give them the opportunities to tell us where they need help and assistance. And this piece is another big barrier in education, right? Is that there's this sense like we can't trust teachers that they actually know what they need to do because, oh yes, they're professionals. And oh yes, most teachers have some level of master's or higher degree of learning about how to learn and how to teach, but we can't trust them. Like we're going to give them all these guidelines and we're going to tell them they have to fill out all this paperwork. And like there's that lack of trust. And I think that rolls over into, can I really trust that my students can do this more dependently if I'm not guiding every step that they're taking? And so it becomes that sort of trust and respect that, yeah, we actually probably can. Like when I would say to my students, now I was teaching first year secondary level, so most of my kids were 14, 15 years old. And I'd say, you've been learning for like 10 years. You know how you learn. So here, figure out what's your best entryway to start learning this content. And here's some curated materials for you to select from. But I trust that you know how you learn because you've been doing it for a while. And they would be like, oh yeah, we have been doing this for a while. So I think that is another level that Agile mindset is really based on, right? Is that we trust that people are capable and we are going to give them the best environment to be capable within. And this does not mean we're not going to be checking in every single day to see where are you running into problems and where do you need me to help, and what can I do to help you move yourself forward.
Well, it's almost like a sprint review, I suppose, in a sense, isn't it? It's like, we've done this work. How does this look? Actually, here are my stakeholders. Check this out. Yeah. Is there something we need to improve, something we need to change, something to develop? Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I often would set up my Scrum boards with the testing was feedback, right? Like you need to have something, have that conversation before this is the final product. That's the feedback in education, is much more conversations around, this is why this answer is good. This is what this answer is missing. This is where you're showing what you understand well. This is where you are struggling. Yes, exactly, Ty, right? Like, I mean, the conversation around learning is, and it's interesting, right? Because if you think about like the model of university learning in England is much more that tutorial kind of thing where you're sitting at a table, you're having conversation, you're like in conversation. Whereas here in America, it tends to still remain very much a lecture, take notes, and we don't break out into smaller groups as much, except for like extra help, right? And then they started realizing that that groups of students who came together themselves and did peer-to-peer work together, if they worked well, those groups as a whole would accelerate their learning and did significantly better in their classes than the kids that were not able to find as good a functioning study group to work with. And so again, it's that peer-to-peer conversation that really helps us to accelerate and deepen understanding and learning. And Scrum gives you that. Planning poker and retrospectives, right? Like, where else do we talk about effort? This is a conversation I've had with a couple of people. Like, we give a kid an assignment and we say, this is due at the end of class, or this is due tomorrow. There's no conversation about, like, how long do you think this, how hard is this for you? Now let's align that with time. right? Like if this is going to be harder for you, this is going to maybe take you longer than somebody else to do. And that's okay. Like, let's just have that conversation. Instead, it's all sort of,
deadline driven. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, ooh, like, how does the teacher know this is going to take one class period? Like,
Yeah.
oh, good, I can rush through it and then I have free time, instead of like saying, oh, I can do a better job because I have more time because this is easy for me. Right?
Yeah, I love that.
Just...
I actually never really thought about it, but also the ability to express how do you think that piece of work or learning is, right? Because maybe humans as a species, we tend to overcomplicate things a lot. So maybe, the ability for the student to say, I'm never going to get this done because this, you can then take the opportunity to say, actually, this is what's needed, right?
Yes.
Not all this.
Yep. Yes. Yeah, exactly. I love that, Ty. We used to, I would use colored carps, right? Like, colored cups so that they could like signal when they were done and they were free to move on to talking about the football game, or, or red cups, like, we need you here right now. It's like yesterday, because we can't move forward because we're stuck, like we've got a barrier. And yes, I mean, I was having a conversation with a sociology department head about this very subject, because he's like, I have this fabulous statistician postdoc, but he cannot give me a timeline for getting his work to me, to the point where he was thinking about letting the guy go. And I said, well, have you ever talked to him about effort? Like, and because we never, ever have that conversation. We just expect people to be able to schedule, like figure out their schedule. And the other thing is this then becomes an assumed skill. We assume that when they walk out of college, right? In college, we've gone from as controlled an environment learning to something that's much more open and flexible and more student driven. But again, we still never have that conversation about effort and time is what the schedule is, right? And that is so embedded into Scrum that it makes it so much easier to have that skill set learned so that you can be more predictive, which is a future ready skill.
Yeah, another sort of thing that pops into my head as well is around, when you get a bug or you've got investigation into your Scrum team and everybody has to granule it, a way of doing time boxing, like, you know what, we're going to work on this for an hour and see where we get to. And, you're sort of working, if it is a drop dead timeline, how much we can put into it and how can we get this to good enough to a point where we can move on, and sort of looking at that area. Because sometimes in the workplace there is a drop dead timeline, isn't there? There's a regulation or whatever it might be, as well as your
yes, weeding is a good choice for that. Yeah, time box, just get it done.
Yes, Ines. Great. We had another. I was actually open up to the room. Any questions on the end of our, or on the edge of our seats, for any questions in the team, the group? There's one actually, another one from Missy. Yeah.
So yes and no. Right. Okay. So the question is, do you find that kids are receptive to learning this way as they have been learning through computer interaction by the time they start school, which has not been the case before, as if their brains have almost been trained to think in that type of logic sequence? Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that it's harder for them to be focused on an extended like lecture, right? And then because they're no longer expected to maintain attention, and we're losing that skill of being able to focus and have attention. And then the sister part of that, right, is it's still not familiar because it's different. And there are a lot of skills embedded in running a Scrum framework that the kids need to learn. And so that part, they can push back because they can say, oh, you're making me work in class, and I just tell me what I need to know so I can move on to the next thing, right? I like to say that anxiety and apathy are flip sides of the same coin, which are basically either I'm trying really, really hard to do this perfectly and I'm anxious about being able to do that, or I just give up and just tell me what I need to know because I don't want to, I give up, right? And that is a challenge, right, in education and the way that it's organized. And then Ty, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to, like, I noticed that when I'm teaching university students or people who are just entering the marketplace, all this stuff just snaps with them. People who've been in the marketplace or in the workforce for a while, this is like an extra 50% of time investment to get them to unlearn stuff. What differences do you see between you dealing with child education and adult education?
Well, it's similar, right? If children are less likely to argue with your authority as being the teacher in the classroom. So on that sense, they may not like it and they may grumble, but they're going to go along with it because that's the way this classroom is. And, somebody else runs their classroom a way that I may not like either, right? And I may like how you're running your classroom, but so I think they're a little bit more flexible in that sense, even if they complain about it. Whereas I think adults are more likely to push back because they need to know the why and they need to know what the value is going to be for them at the other end of it. And they need that up front, right? Kids need whys, but they're not necessarily as focused on the value of the effort to make the shift as I think adults are. And Maggie, I worked in a public school system, so I had to prepare my biology students for state examinations. So I did this all in a very inflexible kind of environment in that sense. And I did more weird things, and actually they all paid off because my students outperformed their peers on our examinations because I got them engaged in deeper learning. I was big on why, public health, teaching biology. I was big on why you should understand this and why this matters. And then also, I was dealing with, I think also, especially in secondary education, and this may be true for other countries as well as America, but here in America, if we level the classes, so you've got your honors kids, you've got your like just regular kids, and then you've got your lower level kids. Those honors kids actually do not want to do things differently because they've got the system down. They know how to play the education game. Just tell me what I need to know. I know that I can spit this back to you. I worked primarily with those just regular kids who were taking biology because of the requirement, not because they necessarily wanted to do it. But that was what they were supposed to take. So they were taking biology. And so being able to have much more voice and control in the classroom got them much more engaged and much more interested in the subject area, to the point where I've had parents later that when I saw the kids, graduating and met the parents, and the parents would say, my kid is going into a science or technology field because you turned on their love for science, because you made it so much more something that they were doing than something that was being sort of spoon-fed to them. So yeah, I didn't do it in the easy.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Because I work in a state university school, so obviously we get those students coming here, and so knowing that we have some flexibility, but not as much as like a private school, and so like knowing the environments that these students are coming from too, and just how locked down the curriculum can be, really makes. I mean, we have to adjust how we teach too, because I teach Scrum and Agile. And so they're older and they're trying, I'm having to get them to unlearn some things, not as much as maybe a mid-career professional, but yeah, that's why I was interested if you had it easy or you had to do it in public school system.
No, public school system all the way. And it was such a gift for these kids, right? Like, because these kids in particular were so like, I'm just doing this because I have to do this because like my parents make me go to school. And I don't really know what I want to do next, but the football game on Friday is really important, right? Like, so even giving them that freedom, because if their work was done, I didn't tell them they couldn't then have the conversation about the game, right? Like, because I was exactly going back to Helen, what you were saying, right? Like, it's that, here's your time box, you met your time box, you got the work done. Now you've got some time to kind of use your own way. And with the feedback piece, I could make sure that the quality of the work coming in was sufficient. Right? Like, I didn't mean that they got to get away with sloppy work.
That's interesting. So did you bring in sort of some sort of definition of done or quality standard then for the kids?
Well, yeah. So what we had was, I took my frameworks, I made them all into questions. Each unit was a collection of questions, and they had to be able to answer those questions by the end of the unit. And then that was fed into what the final, I was required to do unit tests because that was how we did it. But that fed into their tests. So if you could answer the questions, then you could pass the test.
Yeah, excellent.
And for what is done, I had them have that conversation in their table, because it did vary. Like, I had some groups that, you know, answering a question was 2 pages of information.